the first thing you notice isn't the planet. It's the sound, a raw radio emission captured by a machine, translated into something your ears can recognize. Not music, not a soundtrack, a signal, a pulse in the dark. Now imagine this. While that pulse is still playing, Saturn is quietly losing the one thing that made it look untouchable. Its rings are falling, not someday, not in a mythic, end-of-the-universe way. Right now, grain by grain, Saturn is leaking its jewelry back into itself. This beauty has a clock, and it's ticking. From Earth, Saturn looks serene, a golden lantern hung in the void, a perfect halo drawn with a steady hand. But that calm is a distance trick. Up close, the halo isn't a band, it's a storm made of objects. Ice, rock, dust, shards, pieces smaller than sand, chunks the size of buildings, some the size of mountains. Every one of them locked in orbit, moving fast enough to turn pretty into fatal. The rings stretch almost 300,000 kilometers across, wide enough to make your brain reject the number, yet in many places they're shockingly thin, tens of meters, sometimes less. A structure with the scale of a continent and the thickness of a narrow street. A crown made of paper, and paper doesn't last in a grinder. Inside the rings, collisions never stop. Ice meets ice. Rock meets rock. A soft hiss becomes a constant crackle, a blizzard of impacts, endless, indifferent, perfect. The ring particles shatter, weld, rebound, fracture again, always reorganizing, never becoming safe. From far away, it's art. From inside, it's weather. A kind of weather that doesn't care if anything living is there to feel it. That's the trap. Saturn doesn't need claws. It has orbit. It doesn't need teeth. It has gravity. And gravity doesn't just hold things here. Gravity doesn't hold here. It harvests. So why are the rings falling? Because Saturn is not merely wearing them, it's pulling on them. Some of that ring material migrates inward and ends up interacting with Saturn's upper atmosphere and magnetic environment. Scientists call it ring rain, a real phenomenon, inferred and measured through multiple lines of evidence. It's not a poetic metaphor, it's physics doing what physics always does. Matter spirals, charges move, fields guide, particles get nudged, dragged, shepherded. A halo that can't stay where it is forever. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. We don't all agree on how old the rings are, or exactly how fast the loss happens. Some models suggest a relatively young ring system on the order of tens to hundreds of millions of years. Other possibilities leave room for older rings. The estimates vary because you're trying to age a moving, colliding, recycling structure from far away with incomplete records. But the direction of the story is hard to escape. The rings are not immortal. So Saturn, the timeless planet, carries something fragile around it. A masterpiece with an expiration date, which means the question changes. Not, how dangerous is Saturn? Not, how violent is Saturn? But something colder. If beauty is the trap, how long does the trap last before it disappears? To answer that, you need a witness. Not a poet, not a narrator, a machine that went there and came back with receipts. Cassini, a spacecraft launched in 1997, arriving at Saturn in 2004, then staying for 13 years, long enough to watch the planet breathe in slow motion, long enough to learn what Saturn looks like when the camera is close enough to feel small. Cassini didn't just take pictures. It measured gravity, mapped magnetic fields, sampled particles, watched the rings in ways human eyes never could. It turned Saturn from a postcard into an evidence locker. And then, near the end, it did something that still feels like madness. It threaded a needle. Between the innermost rings and the top of Saturn's clouds, there's a dark gap, a narrow corridor, narrow on a planetary scale that Cassini flew through again and again during its grand finale. A place where a mistake isn't dramatic. It's final. Because what lives there isn't empty space. It's dust. It's ring particles. It's charged debris. It's a battlefield of invisible forces. Picture it like this. You're in a black room, and the only light is the numbers on a screen. a steady stream of telemetry, a heartbeat of data. You can't see the obstacle, but you know it's there because the instruments start to tick. Not the ticking of time, the ticking of impacts. A faint, metallic patter as grains strike the spacecraft at orbital speed, each one tiny, each one capable of bruising or worse, because velocity turns dust into shrapnel. You can't flinch, you can't blink, you just keep the antenna pointed home. Because the whole point of flying through that corridor is to collect the last truths Saturn will allow about its mass distribution, its field, and the interface where rings and planet exchange material. It's not romance. It's a haste. Steal the evidence. Get out alive. And then the evidence starts to speak. There's a kind of horror in realizing that Saturn's rings are not just around Saturn. They are connected to Saturn. They interact. They bleed into it. The halo isn't only decoration. It's a process. A system in motion, losing mass, reshaping itself, draining in ways that are slow on a human clock but fast on a cosmic one. That's why the age argument matters so much. If the rings are young, then you are looking at a rare moment, an accident still fresh, a crown still bright. If the rings are old, then you are looking at endurance, an engine that has managed to keep them visible for longer than it should. Either way, the same chill remains. The rings are not guaranteed, and you're alive during the era when Saturn still wears them. That's not comfort. That's pressure, because now every photo is a countdown. Every telescope view is a fleeting privilege, and Saturn, as if to make the message harder to ignore, keeps showing you other impossibilities like it wants to prove it never cared about your expectations. Look at its North Pole. You expect curves, spirals, chaos that looks natural. Instead, there's geometry, a hexagon carved into cloud tops, a six-sided wave pattern locked into the jet stream. It's been observed for years, decades. It persists through seasons, not because Saturn chooses it, but because Saturn's atmosphere can settle into stable patterns that feel almost offensive to intuition. A storm that draws a shape, a wound that refuses to heal. At the center, a vortex, an eye within an eye, spinning like a drain you can't stop staring into. It's one of those images that bends your sense of what weather even means. On Earth, storms threaten cities. On Saturn, storms redesign the planet. And then there's the reset. Roughly once per Saturnian year, about 29.5 Earth years, Saturn can erupt with enormous storm activity. The so-called Great White Spot is not a local tantrum. It's a system that can spread, stretch, and wrap. Lightning has been detected in Saturn's atmosphere, real electrical violence, inside a world that has no surface to burn. You watch bands of cloud change color. You watch a golden world turn pale. You realize the planet has moods measured in decades. And that raises a brutal question that ties right back to the rings. Where does the energy come from? Saturn is far from the Sunday. Sunlight out there is weak. Yet, Saturn radiates more energy than it receives. The planet is warm for a reason. Scientists point to internal heat gravitational contraction over time, and likely complex processes in the interior, such as helium separating and raining deeper down, releasing energy. The details depend on models and measurements, and the specifics are still being refined, but the direction is clear. Saturn runs on something inside itself, an engine you can't see, which means the ring clock isn't only about ring particles. It's about the whole system, how Saturn moves energy, how it moves matter, how it changes its own face over time. Then Saturn shows you something that feels like a joke, a decoy, Titan. From a distance through the haze, Titan can look comforting. It has a thick atmosphere. It has clouds. It has rain. It has rivers and lakes and shorelines. The outline is familiar enough to relax your shoulders. And that's how it gets you. Because Titan's rain isn't water. It's methane and ethane hydrocarbons flowing through a cycle that mimics Earth's hydrology with alien chemistry. And the temperature sits around minus 179 degrees Celsius, cold enough to make ordinary materials behave like brittle glass. On Titan, wet means fuel. On Titan, weather is chemistry. On Titan, home is a costume, and Saturn lets that masquerade happen inside its kingdom like an insult to your instincts. As if to say, you will keep mistaking the familiar for the safe. Then, further in the same system, Saturn flips the script again. Enceladus, a small moon, bright, icy, the kind of world you'd write off as dead on sight, until you see the fractures at its south pole, long blue scars called tiger stripes, and from those scars it vents, gazes of water vapor and ice grains shooting into space, feeding a faint ring, a moon that bleeds into the void. Those plumes have been sampled by spacecraft instruments. Analyses indicate salty water and organic molecules, not a declaration of life but a declaration of ingredients. Water, heat, chemistry, a place where reactions could happen. Evidence suggests tidal forces, Saturn's gravity needing the moon, help keep the interior active, flexing, squeezing, warming, over and over, like bending a paperclip until it heats, and beneath the shell there appears to be a global ocean, a dark sea under ice. Some researchers argue the data are consistent with hydrothermal activity on the seafloor, rock and water interacting, potentially producing energy gradients life could exploit. The interpretation has uncertainties. The details are debated, but you can feel the significance in your chest anyway. You go to a gas giant, expecting emptiness. You find a small world that refuses to freeze. And then the human part arrives, the part that turns science into drama without needing a single exaggeration. Because when Cassini reached the end of its fuel, NASA faced a decision that feels like a moral problem written into physics. If you leave the spacecraft uncontrolled, there's a non-zero chance it could someday crash into a moon like Enceladus or Titan and contaminate a potentially habitable environment with microbes from Earth. A tiny chance, but the kind of chance that, in a place this rare, feels unforgivable. So they chose. In 2017, Cassini was commanded to end its mission by diving into Saturn's atmosphere. Not because Saturn demanded a sacrifice, because humans did. To protect a possibility we don't fully understand, we erased our witness. Now put yourself there, not as a spectator, as the one who has to sign the order. A clean room on Earth, bright lights, quiet voices, a screen with the spacecraft's status, a countdown built from orbital mechanics. You know this machine has been alone out there for 13 years, sending its thoughts home as radio whispers across 1 billion kilometers of nothing, and you are about to tell it to die. Cassini begins the final plunge. It falls into Saturn's upper atmosphere, where thin gas turns to thicker gas, and thicker gas turns to pressure. It fights to keep its antenna pointed back because for as long as it can transmit, it can still give. And then Saturn does what Saturn does. Heat rises, stress climbs, the signal degrades. The last data packets arrive like broken sentences. Then silence. No explosion you can see, no heroic last shot. Just the sudden absence of a voice that had been talking to you for over a decade. That silence is the real aftertaste, because you realize something else in the same breath. Cassini didn't just die. It testified. It went into the gap. It measured the exchange. It watched the system that looks like sculpture behave like a river, and it left you with a truth that doesn't fit the postcard. Saturn is not a monument. It's an event. The rings are not a crown. They are a process, fragile, changing, bleeding inward. Their origin is still argued over in detail. Their age is still debated. The loss rates depend on models and measurements, and estimates vary. But the simple worldview shift is unavoidable. The most beautiful object in our sky is not eternal. It's temporary. A masterpiece you happen to be born in time to witness. So the next time you see Saturn through a telescope, or a photo, or a memory, don't call it peaceful. Call it what it is. A living system with a slow violence. A halo that's already on its way down. A trap built from beauty. This beauty has a clock, and somewhere in the dark, it's still ticking.